The mud was cold. Lyra felt it seep through her clothes before she even registered that she had fallen. One moment, she was standing at the iron gates of Fortress Kaelmar, holding out a sealed letter with both hands. The next, she was on the ground, her palms buried in the wet earth, the sound of laughter rising above her like smoke. She had not tripped, she had been pushed. The guard who did it, a broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and a silver badge that read C. Dax was already turning away, saying something to the others that she could not quite hear over the ringing in her ears. She caught the word Omega, and then more laughter, sharp and careless, the kind of laughter that comes from people who have never once considered that their actions might find them again. Lyra pressed one hand into the ground and pushed herself upright. She did not rush, she did not tremble. She simply stood, quietly, and looked at the 6 men arranged before the gate. She had arrived at Fortress Kaelmar just after dawn, having traveled on foot for 3 days from the capital. She had chosen not to take a carriage, not to send word ahead, and not to wear anything that would signal who she was or what authority she carried. She wore a plain gray coat, worn at the elbows. Her boots were practical but scuffed. Her dark hair was tied back without ceremony. She looked, to anyone giving her only a glance, like a woman who had walked a long road and was simply hoping to rest. The sealed letter in her coat pocket bore the imperial crest of Empress Valith, pressed in gold wax, unbroken, and signed in the Empress's own hand. It was a commission, a transfer of command. Lyra had carried it carefully for 3 days, keeping it dry even when the rain came down hard on the second night, because she understood the weight of what it contained. She had extended it to the gate guard, C. Dax, the one with the square jaw, with both hands, which was the respectful way, the formal way. He had looked at it, looked at her, and then looked at the men beside him. That was when the laughter started. Dax had not opened it. He had taken it from her fingers, turned it over once, and then simply let it drop into the mud at her feet. The seal did not break. It landed face down in the dark earth, and Lyra had reached down to retrieve it, and that was the moment he shoved her. Not a violent shove, not the kind that leaves marks, the kind that is designed to humiliate, calculated, casual, aimed at making a person feel small in front of witnesses. Lyra had gone down on one knee before catching herself, and then fully to the ground when her boot slipped on a wet stone. Now she was standing again, coat streaked with mud, letter back in her hand, and she was looking at each of the 6 men in turn. She did this slowly and without expression, starting from the left. The first was young, barely past his early 20s, with a nervous quality around his eyes that the laughter had not quite covered. His badge read, F. Null. He was not smiling anymore. He was watching her with something that might have been the beginning of discomfort, if anyone had given it the space to grow. No one did. The second and third were standing close together, the way people do when they feed off each other's confidence. One was tall with reddish hair, badge reading P. Crane. The other was stockier, with a thick neck and a smirk that seemed to be his natural resting expression, K. Harrow. Crane made a small sound of amusement. Harrow crossed his arms. The fourth was leaning against the gate pillar. He had the look of a man who found everything vaguely boring, unless he was causing it. His name badge read O. Vane. He was picking at the edge of his glove, and not even bothering to look at her fully. The fifth was the largest of them, standing slightly behind the others. He had a round face and dull eyes, and he laughed when the others laughed, and went quiet when they went quiet. Badge, W. Doc, Cole. And then there was Dax. Captain Rowan Dax, commander of the Crimson Watch, the gate's senior officer, the man with the square jaw and the easy cruelty and the certainty, absolute, unshaken certainty, that he was untouchable. He was looking at her the way some people look at something they have already dismissed. His arms were folded. A faint smile sat on his face, like he was waiting for her to do something interesting. "You going to stand there all morning staring at us?" Dax said. His voice carried the particular tone of a man who had never been seriously challenged. Smooth. Slightly bored, gates closed to unregistered visitors. If you don't have an appointment, and that piece of paper you're holding doesn't count, since I didn't read it, and I don't intend to, then you'll want to turn around. "I have a commission," Lyra said. Her voice was even. Not loud, not soft, just clear. "You have a piece of paper," Crane said from the side. and Harrow made that sound again. Not quite a laugh, just a breath of amusement through his nose. Dax stepped forward slowly, deliberately taking his time. He stopped a few feet from her and looked her up and down in a way that was meant to diminish. "Listen," he said, with exaggerated patience, as if explaining something simple to someone. "Slow. Omegas don't carry imperial commissions. That is not how this works. Whatever you've been told, whoever convinced you to walk all the way out here with that letter, they were mistaken. Or they were having a bit of fun at your expense." He glanced back at the others. "Either way, not our problem." Lyra said nothing for a moment. Then she looked down at the mud still clinging to her coat sleeve. She brushed a small piece of it away with 2 fingers. When she looked back up, her eyes moved slowly from Dax to Crane, to Harrow, to Vane, to Cole, to Nall. The youngest one, the one with the nervous eyes. She held each gaze just long enough to make it count. "I am going to leave now," she said. Dax spread his hands as if to say, "Finally." "And I am going to come back," she continued. "In 1 hour." Crane laughed outright. Harrow echoed it. Cole joined in a half-second late, like he was not sure what was funny, but did not want to be left out. Vane, from the pillar, said nothing. He had started paying attention. Dax smiled. "Come back whenever you like. Answer will be the same." Lyra looked at him for 1 more second. She memorized him the way she memorized terrain before a campaign. The shape of him, the way he held his shoulders, the way his confidence sat just slightly too high, just slightly too exposed. She had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous place to be was just beyond the reach of someone who thought you were harmless. 1 hour, she said again. She turned and walked back down the road without hurrying. The mud pulled faintly at her boots. Behind her, she heard Dax say something, and the laughter came again. Easier this time, rolling down the road after her like it expected to catch her. It did not. She walked until the gate was behind a bend, and then she stopped and looked up at the sky. The sun had cleared the eastern hills. She had exactly 58 minutes. She started walking faster. The town of Kelmere sat half a mile from the fortress gates, pressed close to the road, like it had grown up in the shadow of the walls, and never quite found the courage to move away. It was small, a few streets of stone buildings, a market square that smelled of bread and firewood, a posting house with a green door that had been green for so long, the paint had begun to flake into a kind of olive. Lyra went directly to the posting house. The woman behind the counter was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she had seen a great many things arrive through that green door, and had learned not to be surprised by any of them. "I need a room with a lock," Lyra said. "And I need it for 30 minutes, not a night." The woman looked at her, at the mud on her coat, at the worn boots, at the stillness in her face, and said, 20 coins. Lyra placed them on the counter without argument and took the key. The room was small, which was fine. What mattered was that it was private. She set the letter on the table, took off her coat, and opened the long leather case she had been carrying on her back for 3 days. The one she had not opened once during the journey, not even in the rain. Inside it was her uniform. She had not worn it in 8 months. The last time had been at the Empress's winter review, standing in a line of commanders while Empress Valeth walked the row slowly, pausing at each person, saying quiet words that the crowd could not hear. When the Empress reached Lyra, she had stopped for a long time, longer than with the others, and she had looked at her with the particular expression of someone who understands fully the weight they are placing on another person's shoulders. She said, "I need someone who will not look the other way." Lyra had said, "Then I am the right person." Now she shook the uniform out carefully, checked it for any travel damage, and found none. She dressed without hurry, working through each piece with the attention of long habit. The dark navy jacket, with the silver cord at each shoulder. The fitted trousers with the double line of imperial stitching down each leg. The high black boots that she had cleaned and polished before packing them, so that they came out with the kind of shine that made other soldiers stand slightly straighter without knowing why. The insignia came last. A small silver pin in the shape of a compass rose, 4 points, each one representing a direction of the empire, worn at the left collar. Below it, the rank marker, 3 stacked bars in silver, meaning High Commander, the highest field rank that existed, the rank that made generals move aside, the rank that, in the empire's history, had been held by exactly 47 people over 4 centuries. Lyra was the only Omega among those 47. She had not shared that fact with anyone at the gate. She stood in front of the small mirror and checked that everything was straight. Then she picked up the Imperial Commission from the table, the real one, the signed one, which Dax had not read, and slid it into her breast pocket. She had 12 minutes left. She went downstairs, handed the key back to the woman with the sharp eyes, and stepped back out through the green door into the morning light. The woman watched her go, and then sat down slowly in her chair, because she had, in her long life, seen a great many people walk through that door, but she had never seen anyone walk out of it looking quite like that. The road back to the fortress felt shorter on the return. The mud was still there, catching the early light in dull patches along the edges of the path. The walls of Kael'mar rose ahead, gray and solid, the pennants of the Crimson Watch moving faintly at the top of the gate towers. Lyra did not slow down as she approached. She walked at the same steady pace she had maintained all the way from the capital, the pace of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has already decided what will happen when they arrive. She was still 50 meters from the gate when the guard closest to the road saw her. It was Null, the youngest one, the one with the nervous eyes. He looked at her. He looked again. Something in his face shifted. Some instinct that had not yet been trained entirely out of him fired and told him that something was very different about the woman walking toward the gate. Then Crane noticed. He stopped talking mid-sentence and turned. Then Harrow, then Cole, then Vane pushed himself off the pillar and straightened up fully, for the first time all morning. Dax was the last to look, because he had been facing the other direction, relaxed, certain that the next hour would be uneventful. When he turned and saw her, his expression did several things in quick succession. Confusion first, then a kind of recalculation, then the beginning of something he was trying very hard not to let reach his face. The 6 of them stood at the gate and watched her come. She stopped in front of them, in the same place she had stood before. The mud on the ground was the same mud. The light had shifted a little with the hour. Everything else was different. No one laughed. Dax found his voice first. "You came back," he said. He was aiming for the same bored smoothness as before, but he missed it slightly. "I said I would," Lyra replied. There was a silence that lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. Then, from behind Lyra, came the sound of horses. The garrison doors, the large secondary gates set 30 meters back from the outer entrance, swung open, and through them rode a column of officers in full-dress uniform. At the front was Colonel Aldrin Price, the garrison's second-in-command, a man of 60, with white temples and a rigid spine, who had served in the Imperial Army for 35 years, and who, in all of those 35 years, had saluted a commanding officer approximately 6,000 times. He rode to the gate, stopped his horse, and looked at Lyra. Then Colonel Aldrin Price, with 6,000 salutes of long practice behind him, performed the 7,001st. Crisp, perfect, held for a full 3 seconds. "High Commander Vance," he said. "The garrison is assembled and awaiting your inspection." Behind Lyra, on the road, more footsteps. She did not need to turn to know what was coming. She had sent a messenger from Kelmir before she dressed. A boy of 12 who had run the path to the War Office in the town square, in under 10 minutes. Now the War Office's senior clerk was approaching with the duplicate commission in a sealed case, 2 Imperial soldiers flanking him, and behind them, 3 officers from the capital who had ridden through the night to be present for the handover. The 6 gate guards stood very still. Null had gone pale. His hand had moved, without him seeming to realize it, to the edge of his badge, as if he had a sudden, animal wish that his name were not printed on it. Harrow's smirk was gone. In its place was an expression that did not have a clean name, but sat somewhere between dread and the dawning understanding that something irreversible had already happened. Crane was looking at the ground. Vane had straightened so hard he looked like he was trying to grow taller. Cole had taken a small step backward, as if distance from the moment might help. Dax stood his ground. He was still trying to be the man who held the gate, but the gate was no longer his. Lyra looked at him for a moment. She had memorized his face an hour ago, and it looked different now, smaller somehow, than it had when he was the one doing the pushing. She turned to Colonel Price. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "I'll address the garrison in 10 minutes. Before that, I'll need the records officer and the gate log for this morning." "Already pulled, Commander." "Good." She looked one more time at the 6 men. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Stand where you are. Do not go anywhere. We have a great deal to discuss." She walked through the gate. Behind her, she heard nothing. Not a word, not a whisper, not a single sound from any of the 6 men who, 1 hour ago, had been certain she was no one. She had known, walking away down that road with the laughter following her, that this moment would come. She had planned nothing dramatic, no speeches prepared in advance, no gestures rehearsed. She had simply known, with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent years learning the difference between real power and performed power, that all she needed to do was return. The rest had taken care of itself. The garrison of Fortress Kalmar was arranged in the main yard, 214 soldiers in 14 rows, standing at attention in the thin morning light. They had been assembled quickly, and it showed in the slight unevenness of the lines, the way some of them had not quite finished fastening their uniforms before being called out. But they were here, and they were watching, and that was what mattered. Colonel Price had done his job well. Word had traveled fast through the fortress from the moment the gate doors opened and those officers from the capital rode in. By the time Lyra crossed the yard and climbed the 3 stone steps of the address platform, there was not a person in Kalmar who did not know that the new commanding officer had already been to the gate once this morning, and that she had not been received the way a commanding officer should have been. They also knew she had come back. Lyra stood on the platform and looked at the assembled garrison without speaking for a moment. She let the silence settle. In her experience, people who rushed to fill silence were usually afraid of what it contained. She was not afraid. "My name is Lyra Vance," she said. Her voice carried easily across the yard. Not because she was shouting, but because she had learned, years ago, how to project from the chest rather than the throat, how to let words travel on their own weight. "I hold the rank of High Commander by commission of Her Imperial Majesty Empress Valith. I am your new commanding officer, effective from this morning." A pause. "I arrived at the outer gate at dawn. I was not admitted. I am going to say very little about that now, and a great deal about it shortly. What I will say now is this." She looked across the rows of faces, young ones, older ones, ones that were trying to appear neutral, and ones that were not quite managing it. "The people of this garrison are not defined by the behavior of 6 individuals. Most of you were inside these walls, performing your duties, when what happened at the gate this morning took place. This matters. I will judge this garrison by what I see from this day forward, not by what someone else did before I arrived." She let that sit for a breath. "But the 6 who were at that gate will answer for what they did. That is not a threat. That is not a demonstration of power. That is simply what accountability looks like when it works." She stepped down from the platform and crossed the yard to where Dax and the 5 others had been brought under escort. They stood in a line now, separated from the main garrison, their faces ranging from barely controlled fear to the particular blankness of someone who has decided that the best strategy is to show nothing at all. Colonel Price stood to the side, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carefully professional, though Lyra had caught, when she first addressed him, the faintest suggestion of relief in the set of his jaw. She had seen that expression before. It was the expression of a soldier who had been waiting for someone to do something. She stopped in front of the line of 6. She looked at them one at a time, left to right, the same direction as before. Nall, Crane, Harrow, Vane, Cole, Dax. "The gate log for this morning shows that no visitor was admitted or turned away between dawn and 1 hour after dawn," she said, "which means that the incident that occurred during that period was not recorded." She paused. "Who is responsible for maintaining the gate log?" No one spoke for a moment. Then Dax said, "That falls under gate command. Your responsibility, then." A silence. "The Imperial Commission I carried this morning bears a seal that, when broken or damaged in any way, triggers an automatic flag in the Capitol Records Office," Lyra continued. "The seal was not broken. The letter was dropped in the mud and returned to my possession undamaged. However, the act of dropping it, and the manner of my reception, was witnessed by 3 individuals from the town of Kelmere who have already provided written accounts to the officers who accompanied me this morning." Harrow shifted his weight. Just slightly. Just enough to show. "I am not here to end careers out of personal feeling," Lyra said. "I want to be clear about that. What you chose to do this morning was not something that happened to me. It was something that happened in this fortress, under this garrison's name. It reflects on every uniform in this yard. She glanced back briefly at the main formation, then returned her attention to the six. So this is how it will proceed, she told them. Her voice was steady and factual throughout. No raised pitch, no dramatic pauses for effect, just information delivered with the precision of someone who has spent a long time learning that calm is more frightening than anger, that measured words land harder than shouted ones, and that the most powerful thing in a room is often the person who does not need to prove it. When she finished, the yard was absolutely quiet. She turned to Colonel Price. "I'll need the training ring cleared and ready by noon," she said, "and I'll want the garrison's full records on my desk before the evening meal." She looked once more at the line of six. "You have 2 hours to consider what I've offered. I'll expect your answers before the bell." She walked across the yard and through the doors of the command building without looking back. Inside, the adjutant, a young woman named Claire with quick eyes and ink on her fingers, was already waiting at the desk with a stack of reports and a pot of something hot that might have been tea. "Commander," she said, and the word came out easily, naturally, without the slight hesitation that Lyra had learned to recognize in people who were not sure if she belonged in the role. Lyra sat down. She picked up the first report. Outside, through the window, she could see the yard beginning to disperse, soldiers returning to their posts, moving with a slightly different quality than before. Something had shifted in the garrison, like the first adjustment of a compass needle. She had been in Kalmar for less than 2 hours, and she had not yet raised her voice once. She opened the report and began to read. The morning wore on. Letters arrived from the capital, follow-up correspondence, procedural documents, a personal note from the war minister that she set aside for later. Claire organized the desk with quiet efficiency, appearing when needed and vanishing when not, which Lyra appreciated more than she would have said aloud. At some point, around mid-morning, she heard footsteps outside the door. A pause, then a knock. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and Nall stood there. He was still in uniform, but something about the way he was wearing it had changed. He stood differently than he had at the gate, without the borrowed confidence that came from being in a group of 6. Alone, in a doorway, he looked exactly his age, which was not very much older than 20. Lyra set her pen down and looked at him without speaking. "I wanted to say," he started, and then stopped, because the words were not cooperating. He tried again. "This morning, at the gate, I didn't push you. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "I saw." He looked at the floor, and then back up. "I also didn't stop it." The room was quiet. "No," Lyra agreed. "You didn't." Another pause. Will that be part of it? What happens?" Lyra leaned back slightly. She had dealt with a version of this question many times before, in many different rooms, wearing many different ranks, and she had never found a way to answer it that did not require the other person to sit with a small amount of discomfort. "What you do next," she said, "will be more of a part of it than what you did this morning. That is the answer to your question." Nall stood there for a moment longer, processing that. Then he gave a very short nod, not a formal salute, something more personal than that, and withdrew, pulling the door closed behind him. Lyra picked up her pen and returned to the report. Outside, the sun had reached the middle of the sky. In the garrison yard, the training ring had been cleared and swept, the boundary markers set fresh in the pale dirt. The observation area opened for any garrison soldier who wished to attend. Word had spread, as word always does in a closed community, with the speed and thoroughness of water finding every crack. By noon, when the bell sounded across the fortress, there was not a single off-duty soldier in Fortress Kalmar who did not find a reason to be near the training yard. All 6 of them had given their answers. They had chosen the ring. Lyra had not been surprised. She had offered it to them not as a kindness, but as a fairness, because she believed in the distinction between punishment and justice, and because she understood that men like Dax would accept a challenge before they accepted a sentence. It was a matter of how they understood themselves. They saw the ring as a chance. She saw it as a different kind of accounting. She changed out of her formal jacket and into the lighter sparring coat before she went down. The sparring coat was dark, undecorated, functional. She left the rank insignia on. That was deliberate. The training yard went very quiet when she appeared. 200 soldiers lined the observation area. Claire was there, standing near the back with the gate log tucked under one arm. Colonel Price stood at the edge of the ring, arms behind his back, face its usual careful neutral. The six stood together at one end of the ring. They had been told the terms. Each would face her alone, in sequence, with standard sparring rules. No weapons, no serious injury intended, match decided by submission or the referee's call. Dax would go last, as the senior officer. Crane went first. He was tall and quick, and he came in with genuine intent, not the playful ease of someone who expected an easy win. He had made a calculation. She was smaller, she had traveled for 3 days, and she was an Omega, in a system that had spent centuries telling Omegas that combat was not their domain. The calculation took 4 minutes to fail completely. Crane was good, Lyra was better. Not flashier, better. The difference was in the small adjustments, the half-second reads of intent, the way she let him use his speed, and then simply was not there when it arrived. When he went down cleanly, without drama, and he stayed down, because he understood it was over. He got up slowly. He looked at her. He walked out of the ring without a word. Harrow went second. He was stronger than Crane and less quick, and he relied on the strength, which was an understandable choice, and also, against someone who had been trained in 3 different schools of close combat, a limited one. He lasted 6 minutes, and submitted with both hands flat to the ground. Vane was the surprise. He was technically the least impressive of the 6 to look at. The way he had leaned against the pillar all morning. The way he had given the impression of bored detachment from the whole situation. But he came into the ring with more skill than the previous 2 combined, and the first exchange made it clear that he had real training, not just size and habit. He fought smart. He pushed Lyra harder than the others had. She won in 8 minutes, and it was 8 honest minutes. When it was over, and Vane was sitting at the edge of the ring with his hands on his knees, he looked up at her with an expression that was new on his face, something that had not been there at the gate. Not quite respect, something on its way to becoming it. Cole and Crane went quickly, one after the other, neither of them with anything approaching the edge that Vane had brought. Cole submitted in 3 minutes. Nall, when his turn came, stood at the edge of the ring for a long moment, and then stepped inside and gave his best effort, which was genuine and entirely outmatched. When the referee called it, he picked himself up, and when he looked at Lyra, his face was not the face of someone who had been beaten. It was the face of someone who was thinking hard about something. Good, Lyra thought. That was the right expression. Dax came into the ring with his chin up, and his shoulders set in the particular way of a man who has decided, in the face of overwhelming evidence, that he might still find a way to be right. He was larger than any of the others, and experienced, and in a fair contest between 2 people of similar preparation, he would have been a difficult opponent for almost anyone in the garrison. He was not fighting almost anyone. He began well, more disciplined than Lyra had expected, which meant he had composed himself in the time since morning, had made himself think past the anger and the humiliation of the situation. She gave him credit for that. She acknowledged it by matching his level for the first 2 minutes, letting the exchange happen on his terms, reading him. Then she began to close. Not dramatically, not with a sudden shift that the crowd could point to. Simply, she began to narrow the space between what he attempted and what she allowed, reducing his options one by one, the way a good tactician reduces the routes of an opposing army until there is only one road left, and that road leads somewhere the opponent did not intend to go. When it ended on the ground, in the same dirt that had received her earlier that morning, but the positions were reversed. Dax was face down, one arm behind his back, the submission applied with exactly enough pressure to make the choice clear, and not 1 ounce more. The yard was completely silent. Dax said nothing for several seconds. His breathing was harsh and uneven. Then, with the particular quality of someone doing something at the very edge of their capacity for it, he brought his free hand down flat against the ground. Submission. Lyra released the hold immediately and stood. She stepped back and gave him space to get up, because that was the correct thing to do, and she did the correct thing, whether anyone was watching or not. He got up slowly. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at her, just once, with an expression she recognized. She had seen it on 34 other faces over her career, in 14 different fortresses and 2 open battlefields. It was the expression of someone who had just understood something that could not be ununderstood. He walked out of the ring. Lyra turned to Colonel Price. "The ring can be closed," she said. "I'll need the 6 of them in the main hall at the 3rd bell." "Yes, Commander." She walked back across the yard. Around her, the garrison slowly began to move again, soldiers heading back to posts, quiet conversations starting up in the spaces between the rows. She did not catch many of the words, but she caught the tone, and the tone was different from what it had been this morning. She had not needed to shout. She had not needed to threaten. She had simply done what she had said she would do, and let the doing speak for itself. Claire was waiting outside the command building. She had the day's reports organized into 4 stacks and a fresh pot of something that was, this time, definitely tea. "The 3rd bell is in 4 hours, Claire said. "I know," Lyra replied. "I'm going to need those 4 hours." She went inside and got back to work. The main hall of Fortress Kaelmar was built for large gatherings, assemblies, announcements, formal hearings, but it had the acoustics of a room designed by someone who understood that the words spoken inside it needed to carry and settle and not get lost in the stone. When Lyra entered at the 3rd bell, with Colonel Price and 2 garrison officers behind her, the 6 men were already waiting. They stood in a loose group near the center of the room, the afternoon light coming in through the high windows at a long angle that turned the floor a faded gold. None of them were standing the way they had stood at the gate. That morning felt, in some difficult-to-define way, like a much longer time ago than it actually was. Lyra did not sit behind the desk at the head of the hall. She stood on the same level as the 6 of them, a short distance away, because the point of this conversation was not about height. She delivered the formal decisions in order. Captain Rowan Dax was stripped of his rank and his gate command with immediate effect. He would be remanded to the garrison's detention holding for a period of 7 days, pending the capital's review of his complete service record. She already knew, from a quiet hour spent with his file before the 3rd bell, that this morning was not the first time a report had been made about his conduct. It was simply the first time one had not been quietly shelved. That was a different problem for a different conversation, and she told him so plainly. Dax listened. He said nothing. He did not beg, and he did not argue, which she had not expected him to do, and the absence of it told her something she filed away carefully. Crane and Harrow were demoted 2 grades each and reassigned to garrison maintenance duties for a period of 60 days, with a formal review at the end of that period. They were told that the review would be fair and that the outcome of it would depend entirely on what they chose to do with the next 60 days. Vane's case was more complex. She spent longer on him. His record showed that he had, on 3 previous occasions over 4 years, submitted written reports about conditions at the gate that had gone unacknowledged. She found that significant. She told him she found it significant. She reduced his demotion to 1 grade, with a different reassignment, not maintenance, but a transfer to the training division, where his actual skills might be used rather than wasted. He looked at her when she said that, with the same expression as after the ring, the one on its way to something. Cole was given a formal reprimand and suspended from gate duty for 30 days. His file showed no prior incidents and no particular distinction in either direction. He was, in many ways, the simplest case, a man who had made a choice because the people around him made it easy. She told him that, directly and without softness, and also told him that he would never have that excuse again. Then she came to Null. She had thought about what to say to him since he appeared in her doorway that morning. She thought about the look on his face when she walked back toward the gate in her uniform, the way something in him had recognized the wrongness of the situation before he had the words to name it. She thought about the fact that he had come to her door at all, which none of the others had done. "Your record is clean," she said. "You have been in this garrison for 14 months, and your evaluations are consistently positive. You did not participate in the physical conduct at the gate this morning." She paused. "You also did not intervene." Null kept his eyes on her. "I am not going to demote you," she said. "I am also not going to pretend this morning did not happen, because it did, and you were there, and you need to carry that." Another pause. "What I am going to do is give you an assignment. You will report to me weekly, directly, for the next 90 days. You will tell me what you observe in this garrison, what is working, what is not, what the soldiers on the ground actually think and feel, the things that don't make it into formal reports. I am asking you to be my eyes, in the places my rank cannot reach." Null blinked. Just once. That is not a light task, she said. If you do it with integrity, it will cost you socially among your peers, at least at first. Some of them will not like it. Some of them will make your days harder for it. She looked at him steadily. But I think you already know that staying quiet when something is wrong has its own cost. You just haven't been made to pay it yet. The room was very quiet. Yes, Commander, Nall said. And the way he said it, not automatic, not eager, but deliberate, like a decision, told her she had read him correctly. She dismissed them one by one. As they left, the hall gradually emptied until only Colonel Price remained, standing near the high windows in the long golden light. Well, he said, after a moment. Well, Lyra agreed. He smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had seen from him since her arrival. I've been in this garrison for 8 years, he said. I submitted 4 separate reports about the gate unit's conduct over that time. The last one was 14 months ago. Lyra looked at him. None of them were acknowledged, he said. I know, she replied. I read them this afternoon, all 4. Price looked at her for a moment. Then he straightened, bringing himself to attention, and gave her a salute that had nothing procedural about it. Commander, he said. Lyra returned it. Colonel, she said, get some rest. We have a great deal of work ahead of us. He nodded and left. The hall was empty. She stood in the fading afternoon light for a moment, the silence settling around her the way silence does after something significant has resolved. Not empty, but full, the way a room is full after the last guest has gone, and everything that was said still echoes faintly in the walls. Outside, Fortress Kaelmar was returning to its rhythms. She could hear it, the sounds of a garrison in the early evening, the movements of soldiers who would tomorrow wake in a different kind of place than the one they had slept in last night. Some of them would resist that, some of them would welcome it. Most would simply wait to see what it meant in practice, which was the sensible response to change, and she had no argument with it. She had not come here to be welcomed or admired. She had come because an empress asked her to go somewhere that needed someone who would not look away, and she had said yes, and meant it, and today was what yes looked like at the beginning. Tomorrow would be different. Longer, more complicated, full of the actual work of rebuilding something that had quietly been allowed to decay. There were reports to finish, and policies to review, and, she had already noted, a supply irregularity in the eastern quarter of the fortress that she was fairly certain was not accidental. That conversation was going to be considerably less clean than today's had been. But that was tomorrow. Lyra walked to the window and looked out over the garrison yard. The training ring was still there, the boundary markers fresh in the dirt, the ground still showing the marks of the afternoon. The pennants of the Crimson Watch moved slowly at the top of the gate towers in the evening air. She would have those pennants changed tomorrow, not removed. This was still the Crimson Watch, and she had no interest in erasing what was good about its history. But she would add the garrison's new designation beneath them. A small thing. The kind of small thing that, when people see it every morning, reminds them that something has shifted. Small things mattered. She had learned that long before she learned the large things. The light was going. She had reports to finish, and Claire had left a stack of them on the desk, organized neatly with small slips of paper marking the urgent ones. She turned from the window and went back to work. The pennants moved in the wind above the gate. The gate log was clean, the entry recorded in full. 214 soldiers of Fortress Kaelmar went to bed that night in a garrison that was, in ways some of them could not yet name, different from the one they had woken up in. And at the bottom of the road, where the mud had dried in the afternoon sun and the footprints of the morning were still faintly visible in the earth, the day ended quietly. It had been, in the end, exactly 1 hour from the first moment to the last one that mattered. Everything after that was just the work, steady, necessary, and long overdue, of making sure the hour had meant something. It had.